Hello and welcome to the Nash Tackle Off the Hook podcast. Just to make you aware, this podcast may contain some explicit/offensive language, and if that's not your thing, you don't have to listen, but I have given you a warning. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
You don't know the half of it, but anyway. I'm skating on the thinnest ice known to man.
He said, and they put a poison in the tank that just instantly kills them. He went, and we've run out of it, so we cut their heads off with shovels.
Suddenly, bang! The whole boat exploded.
Take your sort of 8-inch long piranha and imagine that at 4, 5, maybe 6 feet.
I said, I've revived your dead fish. F off, he said. You haven't.
That was just humongous. It was... I couldn't believe what I was looking at.
I'm just battling this fish out in the pond. I know it's a black man. I'm saying I'll never be a naughty boy again.
If you catch fish and you return them to the water, then you are my brother.
John Timmermans, welcome back to the Nash podcast. How are you?
Very good, mate. Yeah, good to be back. It's been a while, so probably about a year, actually.
Exactly, hence why you're back, mate. We're having a bit of a catch-up over all things, and you've had an incredible year. We've seen one of the films, but we're going to talk about various aspects in the year. Firstly, though, you're a lot happier second time around in the old podcast studio, aren't you, mate?
As we were just saying, far less daunting second time round. My goodness, that first time. Oh, these walls. It's like, what are we doing in here?
Mate, I'm going to tell these guys, you bought your old photo album and everything, didn't you?
Yeah.
Mate? You bought plastic bags full of like old school French carpet.
I had no idea what you guys would want. I was like, we may as well bring everything and then you can just filter out what you do or don't want.
Oh, I loved it, mate. It was a brilliant podcast as it was popular. It had loads of positive feedback. Your angling, I've said it before and you've heard me say it about me watching when you did it for CC Moore's, your vlogs and your sort of French escapades. And that is your angling. I'm guessing that in the ensuing year, obviously, you're with Nash now, so things have changed. We're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of use of bait, rigs, etc. But you ain't done any English fishing, I'm guessing, mate.
No, I haven't. Bit of pike fishing, bit of perch fishing on the local River Medway, which I do every year, particularly 16th of June time.
Oh, nice. For
the perch, that is. I've got a couple of little spots where I know the perch will lay up through the springtime. So it's easy to catch a few of them. I do a couple of early mornings, June time, and in the winter time, I'll do a couple of dead bait sessions. But really, my focus, I find putting sessions together in the UK with a young family really difficult, and it lends itself to normally a couple of trips, one trip in the spring, one trip in the autumn, and then the summertime. But this year, I've got to thank my wife to it, to be honest with you. I managed to get in 4 trips, including a family holiday. And that is like never happened before. And results were so good off the back of a couple of extra sessions.
You said to me, Hassan, I've done the most fishing I've done ever this year.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. They were only a couple of 3 or 4 night sessions, but those just little sessions allow you to explore other places, maybe go out of your comfort zone a little bit into places where you might not go if you know you've only got 2 sessions a year. Mm-hmm. And I was able to try somewhere new, which we're going to go on to a little bit later on, but just on a couple of rumours, I had 2 photos of carp from that lake, nothing else, nothing on the internet. But it was a gamble, in hindsight, well worth taking.
Your angling, even though you've had more trips, you talk there about the sort of dynamics of your angling normally throughout the course of the year. There are the family trips where you're angling, but it's very much you're based in a place that is primarily a holiday destination for the family, and your fishing sort of fits in with that, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And then conversely, you've got the trips where you don't have the family and they are yours.
They are dedicated fishing 24 hours a day. I will be on the lake or around lakes. Exactly that. And those family holidays, I try and mix it up, and I try and go to places which are off radar or have been off radar for the last 2 or 3 years. To most carp anglers who do my sort of fishing. I mean, last year was the Alps. We'd never been to the Alps before. Normally, we like to have a beach involved.
Okay.
But in the Alps, Lake Annecy, it's such a big lake, turquoise blue, the most beautiful place, and it's got the most wonderful beach with a diving board, and that just adds an element for the young kids to enjoy in and around the rest of the family time. It's also got a cycle path all the way around the lake, so if you're into cycling, which us as a family are,
okay,
you've got loads of little cafes, you've got beaches, you've got restaurants, so it's kind of got everything. It's even got campsites, loads of stuff for the kids to do, and it's got that massive element of unknown about it from a fishing perspective.
The breakdown, your family wise, you've got 2 young girls, haven't you? Quite young. You've got the missus,
6 and 7.
Missus is your family holiday, and then obviously you negate time within that. I've seen you sort of go bait up, but you're fishing short pockets of time, aren't you? It's not concentrated.
Exactly. Typically it'll be 2 weeks. I've had a couple of 3-weekers, but the last 2 years it's been 2-week holidays. And I will try maybe bait for the first week. I just do not have the time to go out searching for carp, certainly on venues that are 20 kilometres long. I just do not have that time. So the strategy is far more about finding 3 or 4 likely spots, baiting those heavily, and then going back with the drone or with the binocs and checking them out for maybe an hour through that first week of the holiday. See if you can get something going with the view to then dedicating a few nights or a few early mornings that second week where you've seen the carp.
Okay, so that's how it breaks down. The actual fishing time is those concentrated when you've got something to go on.
As a rule of thumb, I mean, there was when we'll talk about it in a lot more detail later on, there was no point in me putting any baits out or wetting any lines until I'd seen some carp. There was just no point in it because I would probably say 95 times out of 100, you're going to go back with a blank. You've got to know that those carp are in that area and feeding. And with like I said, with a lake that big, it's just a waste of time, particularly in the springtime. You'll find them up on the plateaus in the real shallow water. And to be honest with you, I thought even in August, I would also see them on those plateaus a little bit, but they just weren't there. They were not in those areas, particularly where there'd been a lot of boat traffic, either from water skiers, pike anglers, sailing boats, canoeists. They just pushed the carp out of those areas into deeper water and into other areas of the lake.
We're definitely going to talk in depth about that lake, mate, because it's such a sort of, the film was incredible, but it was an incredible venue in terms of the scale of it and the prospect of fishing it. Not only fishing it if you had 3 weeks infinitely to yourself, but fishing it in amongst a family holiday, absolute hats off to you. The other element for you is that, yes, you have fished more, but that most of those fishing trips, if not all of them, have involved you recording them, vlogging them. They either go on Typography or, and the Nash TV viewers would have seen, it came out, was it pre-Christmas or a start of this year, January, February, your first sort of raw vlog?
You know what? I'm not even sure when it came out.
I can't remember when it came out. It was might have been early this year.
Yeah, it may have come out 8 weeks ago, something like that, 8 weeks ago. And that was the first one. 2 more coming from last year.
Yes.
Obviously, they have to be staggered throughout the year. So 3 trips on Nash TV this year, and then 3 also on Typography.
What's that like in terms of the actual practicalities of it? You've always done it. You've always vlogged, but now, obviously, you're with us, so you're supplying content to us. You're also supplying content to Typography, and you're having to fit that in amongst your fishing. How's that?
So the whole vlogging adds a new dimension to all of it for me. I almost enjoy making the video. I don't enjoy it as much, but I had one session last June where I said to myself, we're going to forget the cameras for one trip. It was a 3-week weekend. I was on the canals. And afterwards, I was just gutted that I didn't video it all. I thought I would try it just to try and focus entirely on the fishing, to see whether or not it made any difference to anything. It didn't. You always think in that moment when you see a fish and there's an opportunity, you haven't got time to set that tripod up. Most of the time while you're thinking that in your mind, you probably do have time. And if you just calm it down a little bit, it's only going to take 2 minutes. Okay. The chance is probably not going to be lost in 2 minutes.
Right.
And so I had that 3-day trip. I didn't film it. I was absolutely gutted afterwards. And from that point on, it's like, well, no, whatever fishing I'm going to do, I will vlog it. And so to me, it is a bit of a pain in the arse. You know, I have 2 of these tripods quite similar to these ones. They're actually a little bit more heavy duty than those.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to cram it into the car, you're chucking it out on the bank, etc., etc. You need relatively robust gear for that. So it is a bit of a pain in the arse, you know, and with more camera gear, you know, once upon a time I had a tiny little camera case. I've now got a whole rucksack full of GoPros, camcorders of various different kinds, but it's worth it. I love it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I thought it'd be completely the opposite, mate. You've done it for a long period of time. I thought if you took them away from him and you just had a bit of freedom and relax and did it, it'd sort of get into that and we'd never see another Timmermans vlog. But it sounds like the vlogging process, and I think you said it in the last pod, was about recording your chronicles and having like a record of them. But it's part of the experience and the buzz for you, isn't it?
It's also part of telling the story. A photo doesn't tell the story. What happens in the lead up to that capture cannot be underestimated, particularly on the places that I go fishing. It can be pretty grueling, to say the least. So it's important to try and capture the hardcore element of actually even wetting a line sometimes can be that much more stressful, and therefore the capture at the end of it almost comes as a relief. And to record that journey for me is really what makes a vlog.
Yeah. You can see it, mate. You can definitely see it. In terms of the places, and we're going to look through them. Your first trip and the subject of the first vlog that was out 8 weeks ago, incredible results. We'll talk about all that. Before we get into the actual crux, the destination, the lake, why there? How did you come to think, all right, well, I've got a trip. I need to make some content. I'd like to go here.
Good question. So throughout the winter, you look at a number of venues for the following year. Okay, those places that maybe have had a little bit less pressure, those places where I genuinely think in a couple of short trips I've got a chance of getting a very good result without loads of bivvies around the edge. Those are the key criteria I'm looking for.
Right, stop. Where's that coming from? How are you looking at places, and what's a good result?
So the reason I'm looking at that is that angling pressure for me is probably the biggest factor that will dictate whether or not you're going to have a good result or another result. Conditions, are particularly early spring, are a big factor, but angling pressure is by far. Remember, on these public venues, if you've got 3 or 4 good European anglers, they're likely to be tow and baits covering a much larger area than you might be used to back in the UK. And therefore, those carp will be located in one area of the lake. And by having 3 or 4 people covering a big part of that lake, it narrows your chances down of the carp even being in your area tenfold. So to find somewhere that's less busy is number one of the priorities.
Is that a social media search job? Is that a contacting people that are local job? How is that deciphered for you, mate?
It's a bit of both. It's a mixture of what videos have been coming out, what pictures have been going up on Instagram, what the general chat is on the grapevine around the carp fishing circuit, and where good fish have been coming out of. If good fish have been coming out of a place, that's off the list. You almost take it as because you know where the big fish are. I know where the big fish are. And where good fish have been coming out of, typically they're carp that I knew were in there, but they've just grown a bit.
Right.
So it's not really about new fish. It's just about whether or not those fish are putting on weight and whether or not a lot of anglers are fishing there. So I try and go the opposite way of where as a rule of thumb, not all the time. So that aspect to me is probably the most important. Coming on to your second point about what's a good fish, that's a very, very good question. It's got to be from the right place, first and foremost. And kind of, for me, I'm looking at 40s, 50s and 60s, ideally 50s and 60s. But I'm quite happy with 40s or smaller fish, as long as they're from a venue that for me is quite special. We're talking good sized venue, water clarity. I do prefer the crystal clear waters, but as long as it's wild, and as long as big carp are in there, that's really what floats my boat. So those two aspects are probably first and foremost my priority. And when we were coming through the winter time, I had in my mind, I'm going to let the spring happen. I'm going to let everyone crowd all of the lakes, and I will focus my first session in June. I'll then have a summer holiday, and then I'll focus my second session, maybe November, possibly even December time. That was the plan at the start of the year. We got to March time, and I was like, I've got to go fishing. It was like all these ideas go out the window. I've got to go. And short window came over the Easter weekend. Not an ideal time.
No, busy, no?
Not an ideal time to be going to France. Everyone is mad keen from the winter, the winter blues, shall we call it. They all want to get their rods out. It's probably the worst weekend to be thinking about going. Not only European anglers are going to be over there, but every Tom, Dick and Harry from France wants to go out for the Easter weekend. But it was all I had available. So I was going to go one way or the other. And the venue, basically the venue chose itself from that perspective, because I knew going down to the Lyon area, which I haven't fished since 2019. I did one session in 2019. The session before that was a very short session in October 16. And then before that was a long, long time earlier. So, okay. But the fact that I've been there 4 or 5 times, I kind of know it changes every year, and the fishing over there becomes harder every year, logistically, rules wise. But I knew it was going to be relatively quiet over the Easter weekend. And I knew you haven't just got the lake that I ended up fishing on. You've got the canal next door, and then you've got the connecting lake to the canal. So you've got 3 or 4 genuine options that should option number 1 fail for whatever reason, you've got something to fall back on. And over a 3-day weekend, I have 4 days available to me, but it's a good 8-hour drive with stops to get down there. And then you're talking half day even to get onto the water. So even that taking out 24 hours of a 4-day session, I kind of weighed it up in my mind. Was it worth it? It had to be the one. It had to be the one, as opposed to going further north and fishing in and around a bunch of bivvies.
Yeah.
And the lake itself.
What are you talking? What size is the lake?
People have said that it's, bearing in mind it's now connected to the lake next door where the dam burst.
Yeah.
I think it's probably about 700 or 800 acres. There's been talk online of it being 1,000 acres. I'm virtually certain it's not that big. Maybe if you include all the islands, that area is 1,000 acres, or the whole park itself. But I think it's probably 700 or 800 acres with the connecting lake. And relatively low stock for that size of lake, albeit, I mean, we'll talk ever so quickly about the history, which I've covered before, but back in sort of 2006, 2007, there were just a handful of massive carp in there, and there weren't so many backup fish at all. Whether or not those carp successfully spawned, or whether or not a small bunch of carp were put in there that then successfully spawned, I don't really know. But from 2007 onwards, there was an influx of smaller carp. And if you can imagine, that's now 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And they were £2 then. In 2010, they were doubles. And in 2015, they're 20s, 30s and 40s. And now some of them have now grown real big. And I think I mentioned it last time, but the fish that I in 2013, I had a 42 or 43 pound beautiful mirror that was caught by a Dutch lad at over £70. That fish, I'm not even sure if it's still in there, because in the last 5 years there's been 2 severe floodings on the place.
Okay.
And you might call it a causeway, but where the causeway leaves the lake, it goes down into what you might call a feeder stream into the Rhone. And when it floods, you've probably got 2 foot of water at fast flow going over that causeway. And every time it floods, a lot of those fish are lost.
Yeah, of course.
And some make their way into the Rhone, some perish, some are lost forever. Don't quite know. There might even be in tiny lakes on the way down there. Who knows?
Imagine.
You know, all quite exciting and wild stuff. But interestingly enough, a carp that I caught, I never weighed it because I was just on my bike and I just dropped in, baited a spot, and then went back the next day and I caught it. It was an upper 40. I never weighed it. It probably didn't make £50. That carp is now in the river, and I've seen photos of it. It's bigger now, and I've seen it caught twice in the river. And one of the big 3 in the lake made its way into the river as well, and it was a 30 kilo plus in the lake. And the first time it got caught in the river was at 25 kilos.
Yeah.
It drops so much weight through the flow, the stress.
Yeah, it's a lot of hard work.
All of that. But since then, and that was caught many kilometres down the river, it's gradually made its way up. For all I know, it could have been doing this.
Yeah.
It's made its way back up to the big weir pool where I've done videos before, and it's been caught loads of times out of that weir pool, and it's gradually picked up weight back from 25 kilo, then 26, then 28, and it's now back up to 30 kilo.
Fair play.
Amazing story of that carp, but it is getting caught very regularly, and you know, these fish haven't had the sort of pressure that UK fish have, so there's a bit of concern in France to the local anglers.
Exactly. Well, I've spoken to this about various people because it is the trend. A lot of more people are doing it, and I'm not going to say anything, but I went over to Holland to do some podcasts, and I was like, I can exactly see why. It's ridiculous. But what has that done in terms of you? You've obviously got a network of locals on local waters that you've met through your escapades before, and being one of maybe the first sort of British anglers that seem to do it. There's a lot more people doing it. What does that do for you? Or are people expressing a bit of a concern, locals? Are the people annoyed? Does it make your sort of intel and stuff a little bit, your relationships maybe with locals a bit more sort of tricky or not?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to lie. Of course it does. It's always trying to strike that balance between sticking a video out and showing a bit of respect to the locals. And I probably crossed that line. I'm not, and for which I have to apologise. But I love the vlogging. I love doing that sort of thing. But 100%, and I don't blame them for that. I do not blame them one bit for it. So that limits your options, and it certainly makes it more vulnerable for your car when you're in and around those lakes. An English car in itself is an easy target. Vans are less of a target. I've got an estate car. It's okay for the fishing. It's a little bit too low to the ground, but the big issue is that you can see in. And even if you've got a green cover over whatever bait or whatever tackle you've left in that vehicle, it's an easy target, particularly if they know that I'm on the water. So I try and arrange my fishing around where no one really knows where I'm going, and I'll just try and stay off radar as much as possible, and I'll try and stay away from the places which I think might have been driven. The locals might have driven. Driven to get annoyed with
You've not had any
like
problems
me.
then? Nothing's spilt over car-wise? No one's done your tyres or smashed your windows?
I take my car off site. I did in that trip, but I do on virtually all trips going forward, because it's just not worth the risk. For an extra hour of taking it somewhere else, local village where I can be comfortable, it's nice and safe, just as long as you've got enough food and water on the bank. It makes the whole experience more relaxing when you know that your car's a bit safer, shall we say. And going back to the story, it's one of the worst places to leave your vehicle. And I'm very fortunate in that I have a very old friend from Leon that I've now known for almost 20 years, that I can leave my car at his house.
Oh, nice.
And if I take the bike rack, stick the bike on the back, it's maybe a 40-minute ride back to the lake from his. So it's well worth it, even if you're there for 3 nights.
Tour de France and then get fishing, mate. The fish, before we go into the actual session, the fish, mate, you talked there about the sizes of them, the stocking, or naturally bred within the sort of big fish that were there. Why do you think, what is it, do you think, in terms of why they've gone from sort of stockies all the way through to 40, 50, 60 pounds?
Well, it's quite a straightforward one. The lake's very big, and so the number of fish per acre is very low. So they have enough water to be able to grow at their own pace. More natural food.
Is there a lot of naturals in that lake?
Unbelievable amount.
What you got?
Well, they're, some people will call them mussels, some people will call them mollusks. They're the round shellfish that you find in the silt pockets in and amongst the gravel. And there is so much of this shellfish in the lake, in addition to crays.
There's crays in there.
There are crays in there. I think from the fish that I've caught, and you leave them in the retainer for a short period of time, what generally comes out is the shellfish. And there, you can literally put your hand in, you can scoop up a handful all over the lake, everywhere, in the edge, out in the middle, you name it. So they've got so much natural food. There are also bloodworm beds over there as well, but I'm fairly sure that the shellfish and perhaps some crays is their main natural food. And the lake is full of weed as well. It's crystal clear water. Nice. It's like, it wasn't quite, it's not quite like that early spring, but when I went back there in June, it's like fishing in an underground jungle.
Really?
It's the most amazing. The clarity is unbelievable. You've got every different type of weed, from onion weed to hornwort to this lovely like mint type weed that comes up from the bottom, potamogeton, lilies. It's just a paradise to be fishing in. An absolute paradise. And when you're out in the boat and you see carp in that clarity, and you see where they've been feeding, it almost adds an extra degree of excitement to what you're doing and what you're going to try and catch. And it's so big as well. So when you get a take on such a big water, it's a buzz that, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't quite get somewhere else.
I was going to say, because the size of it, even if it was popular, and we've not talked about the sort of popularity of it with regards to other anglers. You said it's quieter. You've got this Easter weekend, but it's not going to be bait that's going to be the reason why they're getting so big. There's got to be an abundance of natural raw substrate in which is sustaining them, especially that growth. Because that's
bait doesn't last in the water very long. I can assure you that. There's a lot of poisson chat in there. Come May, those poisson chat are active, and boilies. I mean, it's not quite as bad as it was a few years ago, but boilies will not last from the craze or the poisson chat. And quite regularly, I say quite regularly, occasionally, I've even had it where the craze have scissored off the hair. When you're using wrapped baits, they will just cut the hair off and you'll come in with a hook on it.
What else you got in there? You got nuisance fish, you got cats and stuff.
You got a few cats.
Bream?
You have, I've never caught a true bream. You have true rudd, and I had a very big. I think it was about £3 rudd.
Jeez.
That's on the June video. I think I had a 2 or £3 rudd.
What a boiler, yeah.
On a boilie, it was a little bit of a schoolboy, that one. I put a little white pop up on top, and that's just a
beacon.
A beacon.
Yeah, they love it.
They absolutely love it. But they have crucians. They call them carassin, which is basically French for crucian at the time. And then they have these hybrid type things, which are
what roach?
They're almost hybrid. Like eyed. I think they're like eyed, but they're some sort of roach bream hybrid. They're horrible.
You know,
they love a tiger nut.
They love a nut.
They love a tiger nut.
Oh, shit.
So you've got everything. But of course, early spring.
Yeah.
You don't get a lot. You certainly don't get the craze and the poisson.
Yeah.
You do get the old rudd, but generally speaking, it's boilie time. We were talking about this before. I'm not a tiger nut man until May.
When everything
might be controversial, but I'm strictly boilie.
I called it a blag. I thought you were trying to winkle one over me, mate.
Can't be doing with any of that slush or small seed either at that time of year.
Boilies
only. Boilies and 20 mil and 24 mils. That's the way to go for the bigger carp for me.
What boilie you take? What do you use? Do you use a monster shrimp?
No. Stop saying monster shrimp.
You're just losing his head out here.
So in the springtime, I'll try and go with a bird food or protein type bait. I was using the citrus test bait with some Scopex squid in there as well. I was mixing it up. I had the test bait. I only had it in 18s because that's all it came out at the time, but I would have taken it in a 20.
Okay.
And I had Scopex in a 20 and a 24.
Yeah.
Monster shrimp, amazing big fish bait, not for there with the nuisance species.
Yeah,
it's like we were talking about. It's soft. You want a firmer bait, and I also quite like a sandy colour to it. I think the visual aspect's really important when you're trying to nick quite a quick bite. As those fish go over for the first time in springtime, they're picking up bits and pieces. I'm not talking a bright bait, but something that will show up on the bottom.
Yeah,
subtle, but like sandy type colour, and the citrus, the new citrus lends itself to that.
Yeah.
So I was mixing up both of them, and it was absolutely bang on. It was bang on. I was using big hook baits. I didn't want any risks from any roach or bream. I didn't want them to ruin any rigs that I was using, or just cause some sort of environment on the bottom where potentially you can hook one up, and it can just cause a little bit of uncertainty in the water when that sort of thing happens. So I was using double 20s, shrink wrapped both baits. I would be using one wafter and one bottom bait just to balance it off ever so slightly. Maybe 13 inches of skin link in 20-25 pound and size 5 claws.
What was the hooking arrangement? What do you have? Just a normal hair hook?
No, slip D. Strictly because I'm using a double bait.
Yeah.
If I'm using a single bait, I would just have it on the hair.
Okay.
Maybe have 5 to 10 mil gap. But when you're putting two big baits on, nuisance species and even small carp can very easily separate those baits and plug that top bait up closer to the shank.
Yeah.
And ruin the flexibility of the rig. And the sort of hooking dynamics. So I will always fish double baits with a slip D, just to hold them together more than anything else.
Nice, like that.
100%. And big bait, I like a big bait. Whether or not it eliminates some of the smaller fish, perhaps. But for those big fish, we'll talk about this, but the real big one I had, it had a mouth like the size of an orange, and that size 5 claw was 2 to 3 inches back and buried down to the shank. It wasn't ever coming off, and those fish were feeding confidently. They were picking up double baits, no problem at all. So you want a nice long hook link that will allow movement and allow that hook to go deep into the mouth on the suck. And fishing with a 4-ounce lead, ever so simple lead clip system. One aspect that I do want to mention, that I probably didn't do so much before I joined Nash was the inclusion of a snag leader.
Okay.
It's snag fishing over there, and there are savage gravel bars all over that place. So probably 15 metres, a long link of 40 or 60 pound snag leader. Just a godsend. Not only that, but with the harder fighting ones, it does just give that little bit more flexible cushioning on a scope when you're playing them. So, it's adding a couple of extra advantages, shall we say, of landing those fish.
That's onto a braid, is it?
Instead of braid straight through with a bit of leg core. But again, I used that for years and I didn't have any problems with it. But there's also the visibility aspect of it.
Yeah.
You can't see that in clear water like you can braid and leg core. So a lot of advantages of using that, and it's part of the standard setup now.
The fishing, before you even get to locating them and where you fished and how you approached it and spots, you talked about a 40-minute cycle. Mate, it looks like an absolute nightmare just to get yourself in the boat to go and look for them.
It's a ball lake.
That looked, honestly, at that point, when I saw the video, I saw you you sort of drop your boat off from your car, pump your boat up, got your stuff out, then drove your car off, left the boat stashed, then biked back, got into your boat, and then went to go and look for some fish.
Yeah.
What are you doing,
But
man?
I also baited a couple of spots as well when I went off.
You need to rock up to Lenia, mate. Park outside your swim. Camp in your camper van, mate. Put your telly on.
No, it's not for me, that sort of thing. So that was exactly what happened, albeit I did bait. You've got to try and hedge your bets as much as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, you've got 3 real good venues real close together. So if option 1 fails, I've got a very straightforward backup plan behind.
Yeah.
And so it's a major ball lake, but that half a day of extra ball lake and 2,000 calories maybe extra could determine the difference between a major success and holding some sort of hippo and going home with your tail between your legs. Cannot underestimate the importance of prepping everything, going through that groundwork and hard work early on your session so that you have everything ready. I can relax when I get home. You know what I mean? I can get a 12, 14-hour night's sleep the day I get home and recover. But while you're out there, you've got 3 nights. I put pressure on myself to get a result always. You have to when you have limited time. And so all of that ball lake was absolutely worth it. And, as you're getting older, you want to try and keep fit anyway. So it's all good.
It's a workout.
Imagine yourself doing a workout. You're doing about 3 of them, but you're doing it while you're in with your number 1 hobby.
Yeah.
So it's a no-brainer.
Mate, it's fair play. It's some effort, but it paid off. The fishing.
Let's go to it.
It's early spring, isn't it? March.
It's first
Easter weekend.
Easter weekend, first week of April.
Yeah.
I've done all of that hard work. Okay. I'm back on the water. I've got down. I found that my boat hasn't been found in the reeds. Okay. And that area of the lake, I actually spoke to a Dutch angler that fished there a few weeks earlier. Okay. Knowing your contacts is always important.
The Dutch angler, yeah.
And he had a few fish from that area. So it was the obvious place to start. Okay. And bearing in mind, I've been through this ball lake. It was late in the evening and it's a day only venue. And I wasn't going to be fishing at night. And I didn't really want anyone to see me. You're not really supposed to be in the park during the night, even though you're not going to be fishing. Okay. So you've got to try and get yourself somewhere hidden at least. Yeah. So the plan was to get a few spots found, a few spots lightly baited with boilies, with the view that I'll start fishing at first light the next morning. That was the idea. On the way down to the reeds, there's I think it's the French national team of rowers row up and down that lake. I'm not sure if it's the national team. It might be the local professionals, but they go out every day and they go up and back, and there's a speedboat guy instructing them. Can you know where this is going?
I know exactly where this is going.
He's clocked me straight away with my 2.4 rib that high with stuff, and it's just like, this is not a good start. And to be fair, I deserved it. It was probably lunchtime around this point. I'm flying down the lake with a bike on the top, sleeping bag, bed sheet, all the stuff that you don't really. He's clocked me straight away. He's come over to me. He said, "There's no night fishing on here." I said, "That's all right. I'm not going to be night fishing."
You definitely didn't buy that, mate.
No, he definitely didn't buy it, and he was straight onto his mobile phone. I was like, "This is why I've baited 2 other spots somewhere else."
Yeah.
Anyway, I got down there and I called my mate Tim, who I've been fishing with for years. I said, "This is what's happened. I'm really not feeling this. Do I just go straight? Do I go through that arduous journey all over again just to get off the lake and lose another half day?" I said, what do I do? He's like, "Stop deliberating. You either do it or you start fishing and you wait for it to happen.
Take it. Yeah.
Just do one or two of them." It's like, "You're right. And I'm not going to go off the lake. That was too much hard work. I'm not even."
Yeah.
I'm going to bait the spots. I'm going to pack everything away nice and tidy, so that if they come around to have a chat with me, the worst that can happen is them chucking me off.
Yeah.
So I do that. I bait 4 spots.
What spots?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I go out in the boat, bearing in mind there's not another angler in sight. There's no one on the lake.
Nice.
Real nice. And there's quite a chop on the water, so it's not straightforward to find exact spots that I'm looking for. But the clear areas in amongst the weed, and it goes real weedy. But at that time of year, you've got a bit of onion weed sort of that high in some areas. You've got a little bit of old decaying weed from the year before. But the clear spots are glowing. They are beautiful glowing spots from anywhere from 1 metre down to 4 metres. There's the most incredible bar system in the lake. Absolutely, if you look at it on, as I'm sure a lot of people have, you look at it on Google Maps, on the satellite images, it's the most fantastic bar system of silk gullies, pockets, real big gravel bars, hence the Nash, the leader that's worked so well for me. So you can find wonderful spots. Most important thing is location. Let's not worry too much about the spots. As long as your bait is presented and you're in the right area, that's good enough for me. I'm not looking for broken shelled spots or anything like that.
Yeah, okay.
It's early season, then those fish see a boilie, it's going to interest them. But I'm spreading my bait out. We're not talking areas this big. 1s and 2s all over.
What size of this room? Yeah?
No, I think a lot bigger than that.
Oh, really?
A lot bigger. A carp can swim from one side of this room to the other side in 2 seconds, and they're swimming. They're not like sitting around in a huddle. They are swimming big distances. So you want them to be swimming around, spotting bait everywhere, with the view that the more they see, the more they become comfortable to feed on it. And obviously there's that balance between putting too much in that's going to take bloody ages to get a bite. You don't want that. But I probably spread 2 kilos far and wide over...
what, couple of tennis courts?
For a rod, I would say it was a tennis court size.
Okay.
But you're fishing 4 rods, so you're probably fishing 4 rods, 4 tennis court sides, over spanning a 300 metre perimeter
range,
perimeter sort of area, and I'd spread this bait out, and early that time of year, it's unlikely you're going to be seeing them showing. You might see the odd one lunk out, but it's still quite early, and people always underestimate how long it takes those bigger waters to warm up. And whilst you might be getting loads of action and loads of activity on the smaller lakes, generally speaking, they're not quite as they're not showing themselves as much that early on. So I baited up. I'd done the night. There'd been no one came round. A couple of drunk people came round at night.
Oh, nice.
but fortunately he didn't see me. I was stashed away nice and quiet. And that's one of the big sort of worries, you might call it, on that lake. Come darkness, you do get a lot of sort of unwanted type people. You know, you're in a city centre. It's not far from the city centre, and people will go to the local park to have a bit of a piss up. So a couple of them walked past, drinking spirits from memory. But apart from that, nice quiet night, and come early morning, beautiful still early morning. Put the baits out on the spots, no major dramas. Backlit it all up so that if any rowers or swimmers came nearby, we would all be nice and tight to the bottom. Morning went by, absolutely nothing going on. Afternoon went by, nothing going on. And by lunchtime, to be honest with you, I knew I was in the wrong area.
Right.
And yeah, you'd like to think there'd been some sort of activity by that point if I was going to get a take. So I kind of resided myself to it being completely the wrong area. And you've got to bear in mind just how big this place is. I could have been a long way off. It turns out I was probably 500 metres off, but I could have been a kilometre or so off where those fish were holding up. And that's the risk that you take on these places. And when you've only got 3 days, I do not have time to sit there and watch the water for a couple of days on the off chance I might see one. I just don't have that time. So there's an element of risk taking on where you start fishing in the first instance.
Yeah, cool.
So it was a write-off. Come that night, what do I do? Do I stay in the park, or do I go back to one of my pre-baited spots and actually make use of the night? And given the ball lake, there was a lot of temptation to stay, but it was worth it. Even for a few hours fishing, I put 5 kilos of Scopex in on the canal and on the local lake, right in the edge, nice and easy fishing. And I had a couple of rods set up with heavy snag gear in the car with an old bed chair and an old sleeping bag. So I could leave all the stuff stashed in somewhere where I was confident that it was going to be safe, and go back and chuck the rods out for the night.
That's a risk, though, isn't it, leaving your stuff?
Well, it is. And it certainly is talking about, and now people know that I do it.
That's what I mean.
It is a risk, but if you know the lake...
And
the only real risk is the garde de pêche coming round at night, I think, or another carp angler.
Yeah, carp angler.
Another carp angler. Those are the two big risks. And I'm not putting it in somewhere that's easily accessible. I'm stashing it right under the margins or in the reeds in somewhere where it's highly unlikely. There's no high vis stuff. There's no reflection stuff on the boat or on top. I've got a big cover over all of it. So I think it's relatively safe. And bearing in mind, I've been doing this for near on 20 years and I've never, ever had an issue with it.
We touched some wood here, mate.
Yeah.
Do it. We don't want any of that. But fair play. So that night you went off?
So that night I went off. I lamped the lake where I'd put a load of bait in, loads of nuisance fish. There were even some nice zander over the spot. Lovely perch, lovely zander. No sign of any carp. There was some guilty looking bream and tench, but all that bait had gone and there were no carp around. And to be fair, that's another 500 acre lake. Those carp were much further out into the lake at that point.
Right.
So that was a no-goer. So I went off to the canal, lugged the gear 200 metres down. By the time I got there, it was like 11:30 midnight. So it was real late at night, and realistically, I had a 4 or 5 hour slot before I had to bike it back to lake. And bearing in mind, I was trying to get back to this from on the bike through bridleways and footpaths through woods. It was a nightmare. I'm trying to hold the phone like this. Which way do I go here? Left or right? No, that's the wrong way. It's a long old ride on the bike, and half of you thinks
you'd be absolutely knackered.
What am I doing? What am I doing? But when you're fishing for 60 pounders, what do you want to really do if you want to catch a 60 pounder? You want to
sleep?
Huh? I can sleep when I get home.
Yeah, I love it, mate. I love it.
So I dropped the rods in over the edge, just 2 rods. Fortunately, my God, if those bank sticks hadn't gone into the ground, I would have been pissed. I don't think I would have fished. Fortunately, the bank sticks went in nice and easy. Stick the rods, just lower it over the edge, over the pre-bait, and get some sleep. And I lay back and looked down at the water from my bed chair. I could see the water level rising.
No.
And I could hear this kind of trickly type sensation further upstream. And clearly they had opened the gates. And within, ever so gradually,
How long did you have?
the slap heads are right up against the blanks. And it's just like, every branch and every log coming down the river, it was a wipeout.
Yeah.
And it's
beautiful.
It's like, so backup options 2 and 3 have all failed. What do I do now? Do I just lie back, bring the rods in, get a few hours sleep and go back in the morning? Or do I just go back now? What would you do?
I would have definitely got some sleep, but you've gone back, haven't you?
I've missioned it back in the dark. And bearing in mind, I knew it was probably a 2-hour process of packing the stuff away, getting the van back to my mate's house. And he had a gate, going through the gate, sneaking in there in the middle of the night, trying not to disturb anyone, getting on the bike and navigating the cycle paths and bridleways back to the boat, where I've then got to get these damp waders on, traipse through all the snags to get to my boat, try and get this cover off balancing on a rocket. Oh, it was an absolute nightmare. But within another half an hour, I was back on the water and I was heading off for destination number 2. Oh, man.
You were a mad.
Just talking it through, I'm starting to sweat just thinking about it.
You're a madman, mate.
So we get back on the water. I'd already thought out in my mind where I wanted to go. In my April 2019 trip, I fished in an area where I'd GPS several spots on my Garmin, and I had them still saved. So as a rule of thumb, I can get there and I can get my rods out on these 2 or 3 spots for first light, knowing that at least I'll know that the water's clear there and I've had fish from there before.
Yeah, you've got previous, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. 4 years earlier. However, this time, of course, there's always a problem. The water level's 2 foot higher from the floods. So where I beached my boat last time, it was impossible to beach it. And there was nowhere to put my boat in. And you're trying to do all of this in the dark. I ended up having to take it into a tiny little back bay and drag it through. And it was a bit of a blessing in disguise, really, because it kept it all out of sight to anyone. And no one had fished there for a long, long time. So you almost have to make your own little spots to get your rods out in, which again is quite wild and wonderful, really. And so I managed to find a few little holes in the bushes. It certainly wasn't easy. It's not like you've got a position to be able to strike the rod. You have to wade out to be able to get a bit of leverage on the fish if you were to get one. But anyway, I got the rods out on the spots, sprinkling of Scopex squid and citrus over the top, maybe 2 or 3 handfuls. And I'm fishing in probably 6 to 8 foot in silt gullies in between rocky outcrops.
Okay.
But real big pebbly outcrops. Where clearly these fish are using those as patrol routes. And I caught fish from all of these spots last time. So if the carp were in this area,
you're getting them.
I'm getting them.
Yeah,
exactly. And it was just so nice. You're fishing once again. You're back. You've got a chance that you're back on the fish, and it feels like an entirely new session. And I'm so pleased I made the move. It was half deliberation. Do I give them one more day on the pre-bait?
Yeah.
No, you don't do that. Don't even consider it. It's such a big lake. It's too big a risk. So I had these rods out, and we were basically fishing again. And that was the time I could now sit down and get onto the bed chair and actually get some sleep. And I laid down, and we were probably an hour before first light by this point. And as I lay down, I see a bow wave go past my boat in the back bay in a foot of water.
Jeez.
And it was too big to be anything but a carp. And I was like, flipping heck. They're a carp coming round the island that I am moored up on, literally right in the edge. So there was no sleep. There's no sleep happened.
No.
I prepared, one of the long rods came in, so I had 2 long rods, and I was going to put one short. I only wanted to really use 3 rods. It's quite tight. I didn't want, and certainly now I'd seen a fish, I didn't want these lines to be cutting off this fish that was coming around the edges. I had no idea how many there were either. So, even with all the disturbance of getting all the stuff off the boat, hadn't scared these fish. They were there, and as it got lighter, more and more shapes started appearing. But they weren't massive carp. They were not the ones that I ended up catching. Oh. These were 20s to maybe upper 30s, low 40s. Definitely
low 40s. That'll do.
Yeah. Amazing. And hopefully you can overlay this with a little video of one of the fish that I'm standing in the water. I just put this short rod in over where these fish were coming round. Little underarm flick, 20 baits. English style, 3 ounce leg clip, and I was fishing on the 3rd rod, and as I'm standing there ready to put the rod back, this probably a mid 30 common with a slightly kinked back has come into the bay. It's just drifted past my feet, and I'm just like, look, he's swimming straight back to where I've just put my bait in. I'm going to catch him. But there were a number of these shapes moving in and around, but they were not that big. So I ended up putting the bait ever so slightly further out into a slightly deeper gully,
right,
just where I thought they would feel a little bit more comfortable, and the outside chance that maybe some of the big fish might be. Don't know. You never really know. And just as I'm putting that rod down, one of the long rods is off. And the long rod is definitely it's a twitchy take, but it's definitely a take.
Right.
And by the time I've picked the rod up and weighed it out, gone and dragged the boat round from the back bay. It's taking line and it's definitely a carp. So I'm straight up. This must be probably about 8 or 9 a.m. in the morning, and I go straight out over the top of it, and bearing in mind there are snags everywhere, big old sunken trees, but I knew where I put the bait. There was a fair amount of weed in that area. There was a good chance that fish will kite round and maybe bury itself in the weed.
Yeah.
That's what you're hoping for. If they go on a long run, you've got every chance that going through a sunken tree. I got over the top of it, and the line has pinged off out of all this weed, and all of a sudden there's a huge, great silt cloud as this fish has disturbed the bottom where it's just been sitting there, and it just came straight up like this. And I'm like, that's big. Quick, get the net. And literally within 2 minutes, I had this fish in the net, and I hadn't had a real big fish out of that lake since 2007. I had a 50 pounder in 2008, but apart from then, I've had a load of 30s and a load of 40s, maybe up to upper 40, but I'd never had a real good one. And you can imagine, knowing this lake so well and knowing what lives in there, I really, really wanted that. And I've been thinking about this. God knows how many times you've gone to bed at night and you've thought about actually catching one of these real good ones. And this fish going over the net court was a bit of a relief. It was like, oh, I've done it. I've actually done it. I've envisaged this moment quite a few times, and it's not happened for a long time. I've only done the odd 3 or 4 nights on there, but for this to really happen was quite a special moment for me. And I had this fish, and I looked in the net. I was like, that's a 50. So amazing, absolutely amazing. And I've got that. And as I've brought this fish back, the margin rod has roared that I've just put out.
A little bit further out.
Out. And it's just absolutely one toning, and I've got this fish, and it's kited. There's nothing I could do. It's kited round. It's gone through a bunch of trees. I've gone out in the boat and I've seen my boilie in the rig buried in a branch. Lost it. I think it was one of the small ones. I think I was very lucky that it was one of the smaller fish, judging by the speed of the take and judging by the fish that I'd seen in that area straight away. I think it was one of the small ones. So anyway, these fish had not been disturbed by all of this commotion. They were still coming round in groups every half an hour.
Wow.
Had this fish, we weighed it, we photoed it. I weighed it and photoed it. Wonderful fish, low 50. It's got a big scale on it. And I hadn't recognised it until I lifted it up for the camera. And straight away I recognised it as a fish that I'd seen at a much lower weight from a French contact of mine.
Okay.
Amazing. Yeah, beautiful fish. I've seen it caught twice in photos. So over the years. So it was one of the known ones. And every time you see one, you're like, excellent. That fish didn't go down the river. That's what's going through your mind. That's another one that didn't go down the river. So I've had this 50. I'm obviously as happy as Larry, and we're well into the daytime at this point. So I bring the long rods in. There's just no point in. I don't want to be seen out in a boat at this time of the day. Okay. I bring the long rods in, and I put a bait out where I just lost one, and then maybe 15, 20 metres round to the right, I put one in the edge round there, which is the same island. So all I've got now is basically 2 rods in the near side margin. There's no lines out. There's nothing that can ruin it. And I've basically dotted a few baits about all the way around. But I'm effectively fishing 2 rods in about 6 foot of water, double 20 mil hook baits, nice big baits. Excuse me. And maybe early afternoon, maybe not even that late. The right hand rod is away, which is the one fish around to the right, obviously, and that's again a very, very straightforward fight. It kited round. It maybe took 20, 30 yards of line on the initial run, but then it just waddled in on a short line, and it was a 50-pound common. Jesus. I couldn't believe it. The most beautiful, immaculate. I think it was 52-pound common. I couldn't believe it. I had a brace of 50s. And all you're thinking to yourself is, well, all that shit was worthwhile going through all of that ball lake.
You've earned it.
And I've now got a brace of 50s. And I've still got a day and a half left. I've still got a day and a half left of fishing. Weigh it, photo it, rod goes back out. 2 hours later, that same rod is away again. By this point, I'd stopped seeing the fish.
Okay, so it spooked a bit.
They'd spooked him a little bit. And the rod was away, exactly the same routine. It almost looked like it could have been the same fish, but it wasn't. It was a different one. Another 50, 51 pounds, something like that. Unbelievable. So now I've got 3 50s. And these are fish that I believe would typically, over the last 5 years, they would typically have been maybe low to mid 40s. And given they're still relatively young, they're still growing. They're still growing. And of course, at that time of year, they were females, they were carrying a little bit of spawn, which is obviously going to bump them up a couple of extra pounds. But I'd had these 350s.
What a trip already.
It was an unbelievable day's fishing. And by this point, it was getting relatively late on. I didn't even bother putting that rod back out. I started thinking to myself, I'm going to get a good night's sleep tonight. I'm going to wind the rods in, put a bit of bait in.
Leave it,
Leave it. Let's just let it settle for 12 hours, and then we'll fish again at first light. And I'm on the phone with my mate, talking through what I've had. And we're going through, I've probably got a bacon sandwich on the go or something, and a beer.
Yeah, you've earned that as well.
And the final rod in the water is one toning. And I wish I'd had my GoPro on, but I didn't. And it's one toning. I run out to the rod, and there's almost a level of complacency about it when you've had a load of big ones.
Yeah.
And I should have known straight away that this was something a little bit special. The fight was a much stronger fish. There was no sign of any tired, waking up from the winter sleep going on. This was a strong fish. But I kept it on a short line, relatively short line. And maybe 15 minutes later of this fish just plodding around, just not making any time on it. I knew it was big, but I didn't appreciate how big. And even when I got it in the net, I looked in the net and I thought to myself, that's another low 50. That was my initial thought, but it was a mirror and I always prefer a mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But when I went to lift it out, I knew it was a lot bigger. And it went 27.9 kilos.
What's that in pounds?
61 and something. 61 something, not quite sure what. And it was an immaculate fish. I say in the video that I don't recognise it. I did when I checked back against photos of other people who had caught fish from the lake. It was one of the big ones that I've seen in another photo.
Right,
but it's an immaculate. Only one photo from one angler.
Wow.
So these are not, and it's definitely one of the young ones as well. Younger fish. It's not one of the old stock. And it's not, and again, it's another one that didn't go down the river.
Yeah, it's not in the river.
But I say these fish do not come out regularly. The lake does not get fished that regularly. So there's that massive element of the unknown about it still. And I couldn't believe it. 60 and 350s in 12-hour session, or 12-hour day, shall we say. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, tomorrow might be even better. But of course, it never is. It never is. I baited. I possibly put a little bit too much that evening. It's very easily done. And the next morning, I had 2 takes the next day, a 30 and a 40, both commons.
Still though, mate.
Oh, yeah, amazing stamper carp. Absolutely amazing stamper carp. Didn't lose any more. I just lost the one fish. It is what it is. But no, the tackle held up well. I do like a claw in a size 5. It's a strong hook, and the gape.
It's a big gape, isn't it?
It's a big gape. I don't really like going bigger than a 5. If I'm honest.
Yeah.
On the claws, I like a 6 or a 5.
Yeah.
And on the Fang, and I used to either the Fang X or the claw.
4.
Not a big Twister fan, if I'm honest.
Fang X is a 4, surely.
A 4 or a 5 in the Fang X.
Okay,
a 4 or a 5, exactly. I've got some 2s as well. They're
2s,
but for a 24mm bait,
I suppose
you want a little bit more gape. But to be honest with you, I'd probably still rather a 4 and maybe lengthen that hair slightly.
Yeah.
Lengthen that hair slightly. But yeah.
That's incredible.
Oh, absolutely amazing. Just looking back, that's got to be one of the best sessions I've ever had.
If you condense it to the actual period of time that you caught them as well, that is an incredible hit of fish in a very, very short little window. Isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm also, there's an element of luck about it. Those were mainly female fish. For whatever reason, I picked up on a group of females. Absolute. Not a mark in their mouths. Immaculate carp, fin perfect, scale perfect, mouth perfect. I couldn't have asked for any more in an Easter weekend. Jeez. So I'd had 6 fish over the Easter weekend. That was it. That 44 was the last, and that afternoon. It got colder as well.
Yeah.
It got colder. The fish had definitely moved out into a different area because the previous day it had been sunny. That may well have been why they were patrolling that island margin and that back bay. So yeah, unbelievable session. Got back, went through the Ball Lake, drove up through the night, and believe it or not, I was in the office at 8:30 the next morning.
Yeah, but you'd be buzzing your head off going back after that, wouldn't you? You wouldn't even feel it.
I was buzzing.
If you caught nothing and you'd done all that and you'd struggle city, spent 2 more nights in the other spot.
I WhatsApped Henry on the way back.
Yeah.
And I was at Calais. I'd just done this 8-hour drive. I was waiting to go onto the tunnel.
Yeah.
And I said, if I blanked, I will never, ever do that again. But I haven't blanked.
Thank God.
Yeah.
But you went back to the same venue, didn't you? Later in the year.
That's right. So again, all those winter plans had changed. Now I caught those. I thought I had to go back there because one of those A team is worth its weight in gold for me. And that big
a specific fish or any of them.
Well, when I say an A team, I'm talking upper 50 plus, really.
Okay.
And I'd had one of them. I'd had 60.
Yeah.
And there are just a handful of them in there, just a handful. But one of them is just worth its weight. It's worth so much to me in my heart that that I had to go back there. I'm not even too fussed about the 50s from there now because I just caught a bunch of them.
Yeah,
but those A team, those 50s are not the A team. There are just specific carp, and I can name all of them. There's two that I've only ever seen one photo of, but I've never seen any new fish now in about 3 years.
Okay.
Those commons may well join them in the next couple of years. Yeah. But at the moment, from what I've seen on the lake, I think I've got photos of probably 90% of those big ones. 85, 90%. Which means there's perhaps 10% of real unknown in there still.
Yeah, you never know.
No.
An 80 just crops up, mate, at your feet.
Oh, my.
Can you imagine? Oh, my
Isn't that what fishing's all about, though?
Well, yeah.
It's about that element of unknown that just might happen.
I like them dead sets with names, mate. Do you know what I mean?
So
yeah.
I like a target. I like a target as well.
But that element is a nice element to have, isn't it?
But these are all targets for me. They're targets in a wild environment of many, many hundreds of acres, and that really floats my boat.
When did you go back? You different time of year, wasn't it?
Went back in June. They'd spawned. They'd spread out. Okay.
Yeah.
Spawning came early that year. Came in May at some point. It was a flipping hot spring again. Spawning came early. Water level was 2 foot lower. But I was fishing in a jungle. You know.
Yeah, you said.
It was amazing. At that point, all those spots that I had GPS'd had a foot of onion weed over them. They were unfishable. And so what I ended up doing was I was actually resting. The lead was plugging in the bottom, but I was finding areas of weed that weren't as thick. And I was actually fishing on top of the weed.
Well, yeah.
On top of it. You couldn't fish. There were no clear spots.
Well, no, I was going to say, was there any clear spots? No.
It was that weedy. But as long as I could see my bait,
you were happy.
I was happy. And by that point, tigers and boilies, I was still using body hook baits. I was just using the citrus, maybe a bit of Scopex, and also tigers.
Right.
Few handfuls.
Whole tigers or slush?
Oh no, whole tigers.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to start encouraging those bream, those rudd and those hybrid type things. So whole tigers, whole boilies.
And in terms of area of the lake, have you gone to a different area?
I started in exactly the same spot, albeit that there were no carp coming around that. They were much further out into the lake. I was fishing exactly the same spots, and I had just chucked one out to my right in a very deep hole. I got a very good drop on him, perhaps 4 meters, about 12, 14 foot of water. And that first morning, I'm sitting there talking to the camera saying, this isn't the one, they're not here, blah, blah, blah. And that one to the right goes, and it's a rudd.
Is that the big rudd?
It's a big rudd.
The big rudd.
And of course, schoolboy error on my part, I'd put a little white pop up on top just because I was so worried about them seeing it in the weed.
So what do you have, a 24 mil or a 20 mil?
That was a 20. I can't even remember. It might have even been a Ronnie Claw. I'm not sure that.
I was going to say, for a rudd to get a 24 miller in its gob, it would be an absolute enormous
all they have to do is suck at it, and if they can get the hook in their mouth, they don't always need to get the bait in their mouth to get hooked. Stupid things. Like jumping on the hook sometimes.
Well, yeah, I'll take a £3 rudd, mate.
You know what? It probably was £3, but I unhooked it in the water. I've got the GoPro on, so you can see it. But then I put that rod back out. We won't go into too much detail on this trip because we've got so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
But I put that rod back out on the far right, and a couple of hours later, when I'm asleep, that rod is away, and it's the most spectacular fight. The fish are properly woken up by this point, and it takes me right round the lake, and 3 of them in that trip did, and that was the biggest I had. I had what did I end up having? I had 2 good 40s, 2 upper 40s, the most beautiful chestnut mirrors, and I had the most amazing heavily scaled mid-30 mirror, and then I had a beautiful 39-pound common, and then loads of smaller fish as well. Those fish that I was seeing early spring but not catching.
How long was this session?
5 nights. 5 nights.
Hey, that's an incredible amount of carp from that lake.
And I fished 2 different spots. I started there when I felt like the swimmer got a bit tired with me boating around and everything. I moved right round into the deeper water, and I was sure that given how shallow it was at this time of year, they were using that deep water during the daytime. Right. I was sure that they were moving around into the deep water out of sight, because you could go out in the boat and I could see 100 metres in all directions.
Wow.
There was no sign of a carp. There was no sign of any carp.
I was going to say, so you've gone on a bit of a hunch rather than actually seeing one bosh or something.
All the takes were heavily focused in early morning, putting the baits out at 4 a.m, and by 11 o'clock it was all over.
Done.
It was all over, and those fish had moved. So I was convinced they were round in the deeper water, and so I went round into the deeper water with the view that I might be able to pick up a couple of daytime bites. Yeah. And in the end, when I went out to the deeper water, the only takes I had were tight in the near margins. And again, those were early morning takes. I wasn't fishing during the night. I might have had a few more at night, but I fished 2 rods in real deep areas, and I didn't get a touch on them. Right. I mean, there's no nuisance fish down at that level, and there's no natural food down there either.
Yeah, of course.
And maybe it's an autumn area. Don't know. Not a touch, but it was an amazing session. And it actually made for a really, really good video as well. Loads of action, loads of GoPro action, most spectacular fights in crystal clear water in and around Snags.
Sounds epic. Also,
it was epic.
You don't expect that number of takes. I wouldn't if I was on that sheet of water.
No.
I mean, I know maybe spring if you find them and they're a bit they're not really awake and they're still maybe okay, fair dues, you can have a few, and if they're the big uns and you've dropped on the mother load, fair dues. But at that time of year, when they've spawned and as you say they spread out, and I wouldn't think you'd.
So yeah, I was probably getting on average a couple of takes a morning, maybe
quality
2 or 3 takes a morning. Bearing in mind, there's a lot of disturbance with getting 4 rods out at first light. I think that probably lost me a couple of fish.
Yeah.
When I say lost me, I didn't hook them, but I think that possibly scared off a few. But even so, I had 2 incredible carp, mid 40 and upper 40, that were that I'd never seen before. You know, wow. It really does beg the question what's still in there, because I know they're not massive carp, but I'd never seen these 2.
They are, mate.
And they were beautiful. Beautiful carp.
That is 2 epic trips, mate. What an epic place, and like the photos will show and the videos will show.
Exactly.
But they are, mate, it was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous angling, and the effort that you went to do it weren't on a play. That was some seriously good angling. The other place, and I watched this video, I think I watched it 2 nights ago. You are a madman. I thought you were mad before, sort of pedaling around Tour de France in it, moving, not sleeping, and eventually catching them. But when you go to Lake Annecy on a family holiday, so you've got to add that element in there, keep the kids happy, keep the missus happy, and then you actually stick your fishing head on and think, well, this is an opportunity to fish that lake and hopefully catch one. I would not fancy my chances on that. It's massive, mate. How big is it?
I think it's about 6,800 acres. Yeah, it's a monster, and it's also real deep.
Is it?
It's real. It's obviously a mountain lake.
Yeah.
But the margins are there are big plateaus all the way around the edge before it then drops off into oblivion. And in the springtime, those fish will move up onto those areas and feed.
You said that before.
Yeah, but at that time of year, it was too late for that. Yeah, late August, they moved into slightly deeper water.
Did you have any idea of what's in there carp-wise? Did you have any intel or not?
So I was actually really miffed because I'd booked all this before the Nash France did a video on the place.
Yes.
I booked all of this, and again, going back to what we spoke about earlier, trying to find somewhere off radar, off the beaten track. There are a lot of alpine lakes, and most carp anglers you talk to say, "Oh, it's going to be busy over in the Alps," but they're talking about a handful of circuit waters.
Yeah, I know.
That everyone goes
Even
to.
I know those.
Full to the brim with carp.
Yeah.
When you go to places like this, there's a lot of private sections of bank. It's not easy to fish. There's hardly any carp in there per acre. So from that perspective, it was perfect for me. I looked at the other ones. I looked at Bourget and I looked at Aiguebelette. Those are the three real big ones. And Annecy is the least fished out of those three. Okay, and that's what drew me to it. They've all obviously just got a few carp in them, but that was what really drew Annecy to me, was that it doesn't get fished. And of course, a few weeks later after I booked it, a video comes out on it. It's like,
no.
Didn't make any difference. In fact, it probably, I watched the video 2 or 3 times. I watched all of the French stuff. I love the Nash France team and what they do. And it was actually a real useful insight into what was in the lake, because I didn't have a clue.
Did you not?
But it had everything. It had everything for a family holiday, and it had that massive element of unknown. So I watched that video and I thought, does that mean that there's going to be a bunch of boats over this lake?
No, the prospect of fishing that must be mental.
And there wasn't one other angler.
You would be mental.
Yeah.
You are. But you know what I'm saying? To go there, of all the places, like you said, there's other places, and not the places you referenced, but they're not too far away where it might be a bit busier maybe, but you are almost guaranteed, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. They're full of fish, those Alps lakes. And that's just not really what I'm going to France for. So we spoke about it earlier. The strategy was to bait a few of the shallower areas and then stick the drone up early morning and see whether I could find those carp in any part. And that first morning, I thought I was onto it straight away, but they were tench. They were all tench.
You gave it some bait though, boy, didn't you?
You have to take seed. You can't do just that with boilie.
How much bait did you take, and how much did you use in that first bait up?
So I think I took plus 100 kilo boilie, all in 20s and 24s. I just emptied the freezer and everything that I had. Some of it was 10 years. Everything went out there. Old tigers, everything.
Yeah.
You name it, I took it. And then when I'm over there, I go to the local garden centre.
Yeah.
And pick up maize.
Okay.
Any sort of agricultural outlet or garden centre will typically do maize. And I take the Burko with in the trailer, and cooking zone in the garden.
Yeah, I saw that. It was class.
Yeah. And so cooking zone, you stick the Burko on for a couple of hours, well out of the way of the kids. Just make sure they don't run over and start touching it, start burning their hands on it, which we've come close to a few times.
I bet.
And you've got bait readily available, and you can absolutely shovel this stuff in. I could have done with a spade.
You put a bit in that first hit from what I saw on the old video. I was
putting so much in, and I was snorkeling. It every morning. Could I see a grain of maize? I couldn't find one.
Did they smash it?
They're absolutely smashing it. You stick the drone up, and there's just tench over the top. Just tench. And you think to yourself, well, maybe the carp have come in at night. They haven't. It was just tench eating it. Absolutely smashing it. But of course, those fish do not ever see bait.
No.
So when they see it, it is like
some crazy larder, isn't it?
It's
like
some
McDonald's
larder that they've
up.
got to make the most of before the harsh winter's coming. So they smash it.
The drone element. obviously there you've referenced the drone. For you, the actual use of that, is that a staple part of kit? We're sort of seeing that a lot I've heard it on the canal systems and a lot of people using them sort of more readily now in terms of locating carp. The obvious advantage when you've got a massive sheet of water is to be able to fly over it with the drone and find it. How often are you using
I'm
that?
not using it much at all.
No?
It's mainly to do with, the transport is just another bit of kit that you've got to take around with you,
Okay.
which is a right pain in the arse. Obviously, when you're on a summer holiday, you've got a base camp and you're going out, you're not got all your kit with you, and you can just stick it up. It can be on the passenger seat, all ready to go, phone there, everything else, and you can go and put it up. I tend not to take it on my other trips. And again, that's possibly something I'm missing out on. I know how good they can be, and I know how easy they can be to locate carp, but I certainly I don't want to be using a drone too much as part of my vlogging. I think that's possibly one step too far of advertising the lake.
The aerial shots.
The aerial shots of the lake.
Okay. Not because of the use of the technology and the way that you find them. You're happy with that. It's just the giveaway of location.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I might use one occasionally, but not stick the footage. I've obviously used them on some of the big lakes where I feel a little bit more relaxed about whether or not I'm exposing it. I will use the footage, but they're a massive advantage if you're good at using them. But as a rule of thumb, it's only on those summer trips that I end up taking them, which is probably it's probably a little bit of a short-sighted part from me. But I tend to go back to the basics, and believe it or not, on the Annecy trip, it was a fish that I saw roll. Using your normal sight out in a boat at first light, I saw it jump, and it was definitely just out the corner of my eye. I saw it, and it was definitely a carp, and that's what
was that on the shallows.
That's what gave it all away.
Where did that show? Because that was the catalyst to whatever happened, and we'll talk about that. But where it showed, you'd obviously baited up these shallow sort of edges, and it was just tense world. Was that in deeper water? Was that still in a shallow or different?
The fish rolled probably in about 4 or 5 meters on the way down into the deeper water. Okay. So if you can imagine, most of the lake is ever so flat at 1 to 2 meters before it drops off. Right down at the feeder end, at the bottom end there where the river enters the lake, you've got more of a gradual shelf, and you've got like a horseshoe shape of weed. And I'm sure that the carp were there. It was partly to do with the fact that there were no boats allowed behind there, and it was partly to do with the fact there was weed there. And once I'd seen that, bearing in mind I'd covered kilometres with the drone and baited areas. I'd covered kilometres and kilometres, and I'd not seen one. I was fairly confident there would be a few around there. They had to be there. I covered so much water, and it was almost like a process of elimination. And so I gave it a good hit of bait.
What quantity? Give me an idea.
Probably say in the video, probably something like 15 Kia boilie.
Okay.
Again, spread out in this whole horse show over the back of the weed, in anywhere from 3 to 6 meters. Real spread, big area, and also a load of tiger nuts as well.
Right.
Excuse me. And I left it the next night, and then I was going to fish the following night. So just under 48 hours, I'd left it.
Okay.
And so that the idea being, if there were carp around there, they would have found it that first night, might have eaten a little bit, and that second night they're going to really go to town on it. That was the theory. Who knows? But I went out on darkness, and I boated just 4 baits in a lovely. You're on almost like a little peninsula there. So,
yeah.
So you're not fishing for. I could have cast them, if I'm honest. I could have cast them, but I did it properly with the boat. Got lovely drops, and
they're over the back of that weed bed, are they?
Just right over the back of it. Anywhere anywhere from just over the back where the weed thins out through to the clear bottom, maybe 20 metres further back.
And the same presentation, you claw?
Hedging your bet. So,
or did you switch it up?
I was fishing with Fang X's and claws.
Okay.
With very, very similar, either a double 20mm or a 24mm scope X with like a 18mm pop up over the top on a stone.
So boilie hook baits.
Boilie hook baits.
No maze hook
all
baits.
shrink wrapped.
Right.
And that first night, I can't remember whether I had a chub that first night. I'd seen all these tench throughout the lake, and I ended up catching chub. It was mad.
Chub?
I didn't get one tench. It was absolutely crazy. I had 2 massive chub, 4 5-pounders. The most random thing ever. God, perhaps they come in from the river behind me. I don't know. But the rods had gone out, and at around 2 a.m, I had some sort of an aborted take on one of the rods, and I'd gone out and I'd hit it. Whether it was it might have even been a chub. Yeah. And I brought it in, and as I brought this hook bait in and started inspecting it, the other rod was away with a proper run, a proper one toner, and I said to myself as I ran over to the rod, "That's a carp take," and I went over to it, and again I went straight out in the boat. Ever so conscious, you're thinking huge glacial lake, real deep water, big carp. This is going to be a battle.
Mega,
This could be a mega battle. I've experienced these before, and this fish just came straight up, shook its head. I looked down, and I thought, "Fucking hell, that's massive! quick! Got it in the net!" And I looked in, and I just in the moonlight, I said to myself, "I've done it straight away. I've had a massive carp from Lake Annecy. I've done it on my first fish. I just can't believe I've done this." It was clearly upper 40s, if not bigger. Mid-summertime, they weren't at their biggest weight.
No.
But it was 47.5 pound. It would have been a 50 in the late autumn, definitely. But it was the most beautiful high-backed fish. Again, one of the most special captures. It's not all about size.
That's still a big fish,
it's
mate.
Still
any bite on there.
And it was the most beautiful, unmarked fish. It just blew me away.
Just that leathery one?
No. So that came next. So I put that one in the retainer, put that rod back out, and then at first light, just a couple of hours later, I'm talking to the camera, and that same rod has swung round and it's dropped right back. It almost looked like a chub take. And I've hit the rod and I've wound thinking it was a chub. And all of a sudden it's on, and it had double backed on itself and flown close towards me into the weed.
Yeah.
Exactly the same fight as the first one. Gradually made my way out to it, and through the turquoise water, seeing this great big leather come up through the depths. Couple of shakes of the head, whether or not it's because it had
a weed on its head,
a little bit of weed on its head.
But it looks ancient, mate.
And it's straight into the net, and I've got this brace. It was, I think, 45, 46 pound, absolute, immaculate leather, and so first light, I've got 20 kilos in the sack. My trip is made. The lake has been there, done that already. And I still knew I had a couple of. I knew there were a few carp in the area. I had time now to put a load more bait in. Do the family thing, knowing that I had a good chance if I came back in a couple of days' time. I just went through that routine between there and the end of the week. I went back. It's worth just talking about the next capture, actually. The next capture. And it's worth it to talk about this from a safety perspective, because I went out on that water looking at the forecast and not seeing much wind. And through the night, it just built through the valley. Yeah. Bearing in mind the valley's about 30k long.
Yeah.
It's just coming and it's coming. It's a northerly coming down towards me. And it wasn't. I went out in relatively calm conditions, and come midnight. I got 3 foot, maybe not 2-foot white horses coming into the bank. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to be able to get back. So I started plotting my route back, thinking that maybe I could wade 500 metres through the silt behind the windbreaks. They put maybe they're windbreaks, not sure what they are. They put big wooden stakes in big long lengths. And maybe I can wade the boat all the way around behind there, which will obviously shelter me from these
waves, but no.
But so it was a bit of a worry. I obviously had a life jacket with me, but actually getting back to the bank the next morning was turning into a bit of a concern. But I had the rods out. I got the rods out. I'd had a couple of chub, and I was really surprised that I hadn't caught anything. I pre-baited again. This time I pre-baited also with a load of slush and small seed mix, purely because I had it with me. Everything went in.
Yeah,
put a load of bait.
Volume. Yeah.
Just volume. That's all you're doing. Trying to cut. You're just going to make sure that as those fish trough along the bottom, it's going to take them a bit longer.
Yeah, you're holding them, ain't you?
That's all I'm trying to do is hold them. And I put out a load of Scopex squid in 24s. 24s were definitely better than 20s and 18s. Definitely. They were definitely reducing the number of chub that I was getting. Yeah. And by this point, bearing in mind, bait had been going in there now for a couple of times for maybe a 4-day period, the craze got onto it.
Sugar.
Not so bad. They weren't so bad at all. But I was starting to notice nibbles in the on the mesh, not on the mesh, but on the shrink wrap.
Yeah.
I was starting to notice. I was double wrapping them anyway, but you could still see where they had been trying to cleaver it apart. So obviously, a 24mm bait is going to just last that little bit longer.
Yeah.
And I was surprised that I hadn't caught anything. And then just as I'd reeled 2 of the 4 rods in. And I was thinking to myself, it's ever so slightly calmer. This is my window to get back to the bank. And after winding the 2 rods in, one of the right-hand rods just went off. And I couldn't go out in the boat, but I just played it through the weed. And again, it was a far from spectacular fight, but it was a fight in the waves. And again, all of this is part of the video, so I did catch it on camera. And I had this most ancient relic of a 30-something pound mirror, an absolute ancient beast that was clearly older than the hills. It was so old. It was a beautiful fish, and again, very special capture. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I got back. I baited again. This time just with the stick because. I couldn't really go out and bait effectively in the wind. Yeah. So as much as I could possibly put out with the stick, and then I went and then I went back to the bank, and then I just did one more. Came back the next night blanked, and I was sure it was because I'd sticked out this bait, and just hadn't put enough out. I was sure it was because of that. And the next night I blanked, put a load more in. I just put 15 kilos of 24mm Scopex in, and came back. 1 or 2 nights later.
Yeah, okay.
And that was the final night. And as I got to the spot in the dark at about midnight, I heard 2 fish jump.
Yeah.
I was like, this is the one. They are here and they are feeding. And interestingly, I also heard one launch itself out right down the lake, which was quite amazing, given how big the lake is.
Yeah.
Just to hear one in the middle of the night, give... It's like that was a carp, but it was still in kind of probably 500 metres away, but still kind of my region. That's mad to say that, isn't it?
That's a lot.
You're still thinking that's still in the zone. That's still in the zone, even though it's like half a kilometre.
When you said you were spreading them the size of a tennis court, man, I don't think you got the right size tennis court here, boy. That is incredible, isn't it?
When I say it's in the zone, I'm not talking about my baited zone. It's in the zone of
you love that.
You know, these fish travel long distances. I've got no doubt about it. So anyway, rods went out, immediately had 2 takes. And what was really interesting was this was a totally different shoal, totally different size fish.
Right.
2 small ones. Yeah. One double that looked ancient again, and then one what looked like a much younger mid-20. So lots of different fish, you know, really interesting type fishing. but all mirrors. And like I said, I do like a mirror. But 5 fish on just a few nights fishing on such a place was what I would consider to be an incredible
Mate, that is ridiculous.
Yeah,
like in terms of a
absolutely.
scale of size of venue and maybe information, would you say one of the toughest challenges you've taken on that type of break?
I think, without a shadow of a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt.
I couldn't think you could pick something much more difficult than that.
Well, Lake Geneva.
Oh my God. But
that is probably the next step up.
On a family holiday?
Well, you know, you can only try these places, can't you?
I love it, mate. I love that sort of madness.
Yeah. So, mate, that might happen in the next few years. We'll see.
What was interesting though is the lack of rod hours. It weren't like, I know, you know, a lot of your other videos, you fish places, like you said when you referenced the first place, you fished it, no activity you didn't even fish it, did you? You just basically tried to pin down or look via signs of baiting, and then when your actual rods were in, and you said at the very start of the podcast, I think you need to know that they're in the area and feeding at the time. To be fair, for the amount of actual hours fishing, it was a ridiculous return. Though.
Hardly anything. It is a ridiculous return. Yeah, I probably had my rods in for maybe 6 to 8 hours for 4 nights.
Incredible, mate. That lever, mate, as well.
Yeah, that's 24 hours fishing.
That lever's the one, though, isn't it? For me, on that video, I was like, you are the boy.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. But that also begs the question, what else is in there? You know, I've only really scratched the surface there. What could be in that lake?
Yeah, but it is also the kind of lake whereby you could spend a lot of time on there and never have a session ever again in your life like that.
It is, absolutely. But hey, I've got the T-shirt.
Roll the dice, Lake Geneva. Oh my God, yeah, fair play.
Yeah.
The monster from the deep. There's one more venue that you fished through the course of last year.
Yeah.
As if that wasn't enough. That's an incredible hit already. Somewhere very different and very much on the side of sort of unknown completely from what you've told me. Sort of a bit of a punt, I'd say. Would you say?
So, this is a very, very special venue. So, you know, I know quite a few people now, and there's a couple of chaps that I would regard as trusted friends now.
Yes.
Who I talk to, the UK guys, and they're you know, they love fishing. That's all they do. They absolutely love fishing, and when they get a chance, they go to France. And I've got talking to these guys. They contacted me a long, long time ago. And we share a little bit of information from time to time. I trust them; they're not going to go crazy, and I'm very grateful for it. They share a little bit of information with me. They heard from someone else about a lake where there were rumoured to be some very big carp in it. They said there were massive ones in there, but very few. But I asked around with a few other people, just very, very subtly. You know, have you heard of this place? Yeah. No one had ever heard of it. And it was in a region, it's a long way south, it's surrounded by lakes. It's an area close to a river where there's kind of lots of lakes about. But it had it didn't really have a track record for big carp. And so that really put me off a bit. That I thought to myself, is this lake going to have the strain that I would associate with different areas of France? And I really had to question that. But because I'd had such good sessions, and it just turned out that my missus had booked a holiday to Ibiza with her best mate and the kids.
God, what a result!
It just turned out that a 5-day opportunity arose, and it was worth. You know, I'd had such a good spring.
Yeah,
it was worth a gamble. It was worth a gamble. So I turned up at this lake on a weekend in July. Summer holiday had just started, obviously, because my missus had gone away, and the lake was a fucking circus.
Was it?
Excuse my language. It was an absolute circus of canoeists, boaters, dogs swimming around in the water.
Ideal.
Picnic people. It was just like, no. But hey, we're going to give it a go. We're here now. Again, I was very, very nervous about my vehicle. And so I took it off to a village, maybe 45-minute walk. I didn't even have the bike with me. Took it off to the public car park in the local village, surrounded by lime trees. Beautiful little spot. Looked safe. I was pretty confident it was going to be safe there. Walked it back to the bank, and this was all done. This was all done at darkness. I'd basically sat it out during the weekend afternoon while it'd been busy, waited for it to die down a bit, got all the stuff onto the water, which was a mission in itself. Again, the access to this water wasn't easy. It was maybe a 50 or a 60 metre walk down a steep hill with all your kit. So you can imagine you do 10 trips back and forth, you're shattered. But I waited for it to go quiet before I did this, got onto the water, stashed the boat, did my usual routine, got the car off site and got back. And I boated up to an area of the lake.
How big's this lake? Big?
Yeah, so once again, beautiful lake, which has got kind of connecting lakes to it. So it doesn't look that big straight on, but it's got a couple of connecting lakes, possibly even 3. There's all sorts of water in and around the area, which makes it a lot bigger. But it's a gravel pit.
Okay.
It's a gravel pit. It's full of weed. It's full of natural food. And it's anywhere from 9 metres up to mainly 3 or 4. So it's got everything that screams big carp, but I'm not really sure about the strain in this region of France.
Yeah.
And so I get into the boat, I go over to the other side, and by this point it's very late on. It's probably about 1 or 2 in the morning. But I'm over on the other bank, which is a bit safer, and I put out a Ronnie Claw and a couple of rods with tigers. We were midsummer, and there were also rumours to be catfish in there.
Oh, joy.
Yeah. And I just put the rods out, and I think, right, first light, we will go off down the lake. I haven't actually explained how big it is. I just said, so it's probably, I'd probably say all in all about 120, 130 acres.
Right, so it's fair.
So it's a fair size. It's like a raspberry.
Yeah.
Something like that. Possibly, yeah. Probably about that size, all in all. And I've gone over to the far side, and the view is I will actually listen for carp at first light.
Yeah.
But I'll stick the rods out anyway, just in case. I've got no idea if it's got a lot of carp in or hardly any carp in. Maybe there's loads and I'm going to start getting takes straight away. You just don't know. And I put the rods out. I found a lovely plateau. It went into 9 metres silt, and then it went up to a 6 metre plateau where the lead would plug into the silt. Really need a bit of a jolt of the rod to get it off, but it wasn't sinking deep in. And I like that. I'm not looking for the rock hard areas.
Right.
The carp will feed in that silt.
Yeah.
And so I put 2 rods on that, and I just chucked a couple of others. And within an hour of putting the rod out, one of them was flying.
Shut up.
And it was a catfish on the Ronnie Claw.
Big one as well, or not?
Maybe about 40
Oh,
pounds.
that's horrendous, isn't it?
Oh, it's awful. Got over to the top in the weed, and then suddenly the rod's doing this.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, horrible things. So from that point on, it was strictly tigers.
Yeah.
But I basically didn't have anything that night. I went up and down the lake. I was the only carp angler on. Midsummer. Midsummer's not the most popular time when the lake was so busy.
Yeah.
There was a rave. Can you believe it? That was on the Friday I got there, and it was still a circus. On the Saturday, there was a rave at the other end of the lake. It's this big open area there, and at some point around 6 or 7, just the music started. Right, and more people started gathering. I could see the cars on the other bank just queuing up to get in, and I was just like, "Oh my God! Thank God I took the car off site for a start." So I almost wrote off that Saturday night. I almost wrote it off completely. Yeah. But I did think, well, if all that noise is happening down the other end, there's an outside chance that it's going to push them up this way. I'd been up and back, hadn't seen a carp, hadn't seen any sign of a carp. Couple of splashes in the middle of the night that could have been a carp, but didn't really sound big enough. I didn't really have anything to go on. It was a bit of a non-starter.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm I'm thinking to myself, this is a wasted trip. I could have gone off to one of the circuit waters, fished for rolling carp, had a few fish, had a really enjoyable trip. Maybe this was the wrong call. Maybe I've just bitten off a little bit more than I can chew. But there was a back lake behind me, maybe 20 metres away, that was connected to this lake. But this lake was silty. It was much smaller, and it had a very different substrate. It was very silty, and it had potamogeton all around the edges. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to chuck a lead out. I chucked a lead out into the middle, and it went lovely firm bottom, maybe 8 to 10 foot deep, something like that. And whilst it was connected, because we were midsummer, the water level was down so far that there was no possible way carp could travel between them.
Okay.
But the thinking behind it was maybe at different times of the year, they could move in and out. There were just puddles through there at that point. But it had to be worth a rod. It was only 20 metres behind me. So I sticked out a load of bait. I said I'd leave it the night and I'll stick a rod on it in the morning, whilst keeping a couple of rods on tigers on the front lake, on the plateau.
Yeah.
And the Saturday night went by, bearing in mind I got there on the Friday. Yeah. I'd done most of Friday night. I'd done all of Saturday. Saturday night went, still nothing. And at Sunday morning, the wind picked up. And the wind started coming up my way real strong. For July, it was pretty damn good conditions, real strong wind. And at around 11 o'clock, I've actually got the camera on the alarms, on 2 other alarms, and all of a sudden one of the plateau rods has just and just absolute one toned. And I'm straight out in the boat, and I can feel it's a good fish straight away. Real lethargic fight, and I see deep down in the clear waters a big mirror down there. I'm like, my God, that is big. Thud. Eventually get him up into the net. The most beautiful chestnut 49-pounder.
Oh,
absolute beauty. Absolute, again, not a mark on it. Real find, and all of a sudden, all those rumours have come to reality that there are big carp in here, there are the right strain, and this is the one. This is worth a lot more of an investigation. Yeah. And at some point that afternoon, the back lake goes. I get a screaming take in the back lake, and I have a 6-pound common.
What?
It's well random, completely random. I've had a 6-pound common on the back lake
and a 49.
And a 49. But on the back lake, I'm fishing boilies only.
Okay.
I've got the shrimp, I've got Scopex squid, and I'm just sticking out 20 millers, more and more of it. And a couple of hours later, I have another take on the back lake, and it's 20-pound common.
Okay.
So they're getting bigger. It's like, maybe I'm onto something here. And because I put 3 kilos out the night before, they got on it. They really got on it. And again, to cut a real long story short, over the course of the next 2 days, I had one more fish on the front lake, which was a scraper 30, and maybe 4 or 5 fish on the back lake. And on the back lake, the last one started to feel real big on the back lake. And at this point, I'd had up to 37 pounds in the back lake, and I'd obviously had the 30 and the 49. And this fish, all of a sudden, a big common popped up, and it spawned out. It spawned out completely. It had this big, horrible, soggy stomach where obviously it had been full of spawn. Empty, and it managed to get rid of it. So I kept it in the water. I didn't want to risk bringing it out. And it weighed about 46 pounds, completely spawned out. Beautiful common. And you're thinking to myself, my God, what is going to come next? But it actually went very quiet after that. I had one more 30-pound common.
From the back lake?
From the back lake. Yeah. And I actually think I caught all of them.
Do you?
It wasn't, the lake's not that big.
It's mad that there's a 40-pounder.
Yeah. And on the front lake, basically, this was 3 nights into a 5-nighter.
Yeah.
It had gone completely dead on the front lake. But on the final night, out of the blue, I got another take, and I had a 47-pound mirror out of the front lake. These were absolutely beautiful chestnut gravel pit mirrors. And I genuinely thought at the time, I've given that a 5 day static. It's not my forte to fish that way. It's not, but because the back lake was entertaining me.
You stayed.
I stayed. I had a lovely time, had the bivvy up. I could night fish on there, no problems. No one gave me any jip. And it was a beautiful. 2 other carp anglers had arrived that actually fished quite close to me. But apart from them, no one else arrived. I didn't see them catch anything. They might have caught something. But that then warranted, those 2 big uns midsummer, they would definitely be 50s autumn time.
Yeah.
That warranted an autumn trip there. And so the end of October, just on Halloween, I went back for 5-nighter, and that was very, very special. That was quite unbelievable.
Same spot, same tactics.
Started in the same spot.
You do like to go back to the same tried and tested, didn't you, when you revisit?
So normally you figure it out on your first session.
Yeah.
You nail it on the second.
Right.
As a rule of thumb.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can say, "Oh, do I want to try somewhere new?
Yeah.
But it's worth that just second or third session, because the score by then. That's where you can really make the most of the public lakes. So I went back to that area. Wind was absolutely chucking it up there. We went through one of the most amazing low pressure systems this autumn, last autumn, that we've had in a long time. Very, very mild, very strong winds for 3 or 4 weeks in a row around that time of year. No frosts. It was bang on for big carp. It was bang on for it. So I started right on the windward end, and I arrived again on the Saturday. There were 3 weekenders down that were fishing the other end of the lake. And of course, I had a quick chat with them. They didn't want to know. They really tried to put me off the place. They said maximum 20 kilo, no big carp. They'd been on the piss the night before, and it really made me worried about my car.
Yeah.
That they were just trying to discourage me one way or another. So I got the car off site, went back to the north part of the lake, and put the rods out on the plateau, baited the back lake, same routine as before. Wind was absolutely, as I said, chucking it up that end. And for the next 24 hours, not a thing happened. Nothing on the back lake, nothing on the front lake. We're late in the year, so I didn't expect so much to be happening, but the water was still quite warm. And by the next morning, I knew I was in the wrong area.
Yeah.
These fish were off the back of the wind. I knew there was nothing showing. In that wind, you'd expect to see one pop its head out.
Yeah, staring it all up. Yeah, exactly.
And these guys, as far as I was aware, there were no wet mats or anything like that. As far as I was aware, they hadn't had anything. But there was a connecting lake to this way further down. And my only conclusion was the fish must be in there.
Right.
Okay. I'd not seen anything in best part of 48 hours. But, and I've missed out on a really important part here, I baited that area when I arrived. I went through a half day of hard work and I baited 4 spots, swimming pool size, up that end in a completely different section. So I knew I could fall back on it if I didn't have anything. So 48 hours later, nothing to show for it. Boated right up past a bunch of other anglers who had also arrived. So there were quite a few anglers on the water.
Yeah.
And there would only be that many anglers on the water if there was something worth going for.
Especially if they're locals. Do you know what I mean?
They exactly. And they'd also come along and had a chat with me. They'd also said maximum 20 kilo. Yeah. And so everyone was basically trying, and I'd obviously caught bigger than that myself, so I knew they were full of it. Went off to my pre-baited spots on the other end. And within 3 hours of, it was pissing it with rain, it was windy, it was horrible. Got 4 baits out, fishing tiger nuts over citrus and tigers. 4 double tiger nuts out there over the spots, and within 2 hours, the furthest right hand rod was away, and we went out in the boat, real good fight, and when it came up, I knew it was huge. And it went in the net. It was a common of just unbelievable proportions, unbelievable size. I thought at the time it was probably mid-50s, but it went 59.12. It's anywhere between 59 and 60. I called it 59.
That's an honest way, mate, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolute beautiful common. Didn't have a mark on it. Fought like an absolute Trojan. And so basically trip made. And I still had 48 hours to go at that point. Rod's back out. Had myself a celebratory beer.
Yeah. 2, right?
Maybe 2. And nothing happened for the rest of that day. And at night, I had a take at 11 on the same rod, which was an upper 30. And then it went dead still, and it went quite cold that night. And at 6 a.m, that same rod was away again. I'm only putting a couple of handfuls of bait over, but I did pre-bait quite heavily. And I went out in the boat on that one, and it held deep, and it was quite a fast fight, but I knew it was another big fish. And when that one went over the net, I knew I had a 60-pounder.
Jesus,
and that one went 62. Big fat thing. Mirror, beautiful mirror. It did have a big tummy on it, but it had beautiful scales across it. Absolutely beautiful scales across it. I got the photos done early that morning. I didn't want anyone to see.
Yeah.
And so I got those photos done. Again, the day was an absolute write-off. Wind picked up real strong. So midriff there. Wind picked up real strong. Nothing during the day, but at that night, a storm of epic proportions came through. And in that storm, I had 2 more takes. One double and another 60.
Shut up, another 60.
Another 60.
They're the first 2 fish over 20 kilo out there, aren't they? That's ridiculous.
These were different fish from the ones I had before. But I'd had a 61-ish, a 62 and a 59.12 common.
Wow.
Unbelievable fish. And that was it. That was game over.
What more do you want, mate?
No. I don't want anything else. They were the most unbelievable carp. I had no idea. All I knew was from these English chaps that told me that a mate had told them that there was some big carp in there. That's all I had to go.
But like you say, that's the buzz, isn't it? Because you could go tomorrow and you could tip up to a few lakes that have got bigger carp in than 60-pounders. They've got 70s and 80s, but they're the circuit waters that everybody knows about. It would be bivvy life, and it'd be like being in the UK. Those elements of the unknown, and a bit of a sort of a, I mean, it was a bit of a hall pass anyway, because you weren't meant to be going on the trip and your missus went off, but you've then taken a bit of a punt. And for that, even to get one of those 3 fish, the buzz would have been unreal, wouldn't it?
It was unreal. And that then begs the question, what on earth is in here? You know, I've had 2 50s and 2 60s and a 59.
What do you think's in there?
So, matey boy out the way, there was another angler in that section who arrived, and after talking with him for a little bit of time, I told him what I'd had, and he was made up for him. He's a lovely guy, lovely French bloke. We communicated through Google Translate.
Yeah.
I showed him the pictures, and he had been fishing there 15 years, and he hadn't caught any of them, but he knew them, and he said those are 3 of the known big uns in there. There's maybe 1 or 2 more, possibly one bigger common, real, possibly a 70 common.
Yeah, wow.
But he wasn't totally sure about that. But he said those are 3 of the known big uns in the lake, which doesn't surprise me at all. You know, autumn, prime time for big carp. It was the stars basically aligned for me on 2 or 3 occasions last year, and the final alignment was
something
that will possibly, you know, not happen in a long time again.
I don't know. You've absolutely battered it.
Yeah, incredible. He said these fish do not come out regularly. There's loads of natural food in there. They are not regulars to the bait. So I think my timing was just bang on. I think timing, the work up front, the pre-baiting and all that.
A lot of work.
Got to do that, which can mean the difference, as we said earlier, between a really good trip or a really shit trip.
You haven't had many turd trips, have you, mate? You've absolutely spanked them on 3 different venues.
It happened to be a very, very good year. That's all I can say about that. But unbelievable. I mean, I'm not gonna. I've got the T-shirt there now. I'm going to leave it to others to go and enjoy the fishing on there. But the guy told me about a couple of new waters. So
you're not telling.
I'm not going to.
We just had a conversation with Al in the office before we came in here, and he's like, "I'm going out soon, but I'm not telling you where I'm going."
If I told you, I'd have to kill you. It's one of those. Yeah.
This year, have you got as many trips planned? You got less trips planned?
No, it's probably going to be slightly less than last year. My missus, I mentioned it to you before. She's got a new job. It's full time. That's
how inconsiderate of her, man.
Yeah, particularly when I've just forked out for the extension.
You thought that'd buy you some more fishing as well, didn't you?
I thought exactly that.
What a mare.
So we will start in March. We will try and get that trip early, which means a May, June trip. It's quite a long way after that.
Yeah.
So if I be the good daddy two shoes in that interim period, I'm targeting March, June, summer trip to the southwest this year.
That's the family trip.
That's the family trip.
Okay, nice.
We're going to go away from the Alps, southwest, lots of huge lakes down that way. I've been there before. I've done videos on them. And then we'll have an autumn trip. So I'm targeting 4. We'll see how it plays out. I will also encourage my wife to go away with her mate again.
Yeah, Ibiza's good.
Yeah, very
Every
good.
year.
I'll even pay for it.
Oh, yeah, mate. Hey, get it done.
So we're targeting 3 or 4 trips. Normally 5 or 6 nights. We'll see what happens. But looking forward to it. This is, as I said to you earlier, this is the time of year that's great for us carp anglers. The bird song has started outside. The days are getting longer. Getting up in the morning and it's light.
Everything's getting better.
Everything is just getting better from this point on. It's the best time of year for me. And we've got to make the most of it as carp anglers.
If you could write down what you'd want at the end of the 4 trips, 5 trips, maybe 6 trips, what would it be?
Good fishing and quiet.
Oh, don't give me this PC answer. What are you saying, a 70 pounder?
Okay, so target-wise, a 60 this year would be good.
You've had 25 of those last year or whatever you've had.
Yeah, no. A 60 would be the main target.
Okay.
But any 50s, with the sort of places that I go, anything over 50 is an absolute mega result. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to places where there are 70s.
So it's a 70.
So that is the pinnacle of all of it. But
what you're saying, John, is you want.
I've only ever had one of them in 20 years.
But what you're saying is you want a 70, but you don't want to put the pressure on yourself. They're there.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll catch it, mate. I know you will.
I don't
You're
think
an absolute force, mate. You will. We'll have a bet on it, mate. If you lose, if you catch a 70, you have to come to a day ticket UK fishery with me. And if you don't catch a 70, then I have to come to France with you or somewhere.
That sounds like a pretty good deal to me.
It's a decent deal.
Yeah, that is a decent
It's a win-win for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely quids in. John, you're an absolute legend, mate. Thank you so much for coming in, sharing your accounts of an incredible year, mate. The video coverage, there'll be more videos coming sporadically over the course of time, spread out on Nash TV and Sipography.
Yeah.
So you can check out those captures. Obviously, you've seen some sneak pictures and some footage. And the first one of his Nash Raw vlogs is out and available to watch now, mate. Thank you guys for watching and listening. I'll be back soon with another Nash podcast. Until then, make sure you follow this man because I'm pretty sure he's going to have a busy year. John Timmermans, thank you very much, mate.
Oh, thank you, mate. Cheers.